doing? Coming to you from the side of the road again. This is becoming a bit of a tradition right outside of Wide Awake, Wilson, North Carolina. So if you want anything from Parker's Barbecue, send me a text and I'll get it over to you. Great to see everybody, and so happy to be with you, and really excited about today's speaker, who's our state treasurer, the state treasurer of North Carolina, Dale Folwell. As we turn things over to him, I'll just give you a quick background, and we'll let him speak for himself. But the treasurer has a long and successful career as a public servant to our state, starting with the Board of Education, throughout various roles at the NC General Assembly, and then now as our state treasurer. He oversees a $900 billion pension fund, which to me sounds like a lot of money. Maybe we could have Tim Smith reach out and see if there's any available for the Teacher Supply House. I don't know. And he also oversees the state health plan, among many other things. So, y'all, I hope you'll give a warm East Chapel Hill Rotary welcome to State Treasurer of North Carolina, Dale Folwell.
Thank you.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Great. It's really great to be with the East Chapel Hill Rotary Club this morning. And I'm sorry to disappoint Don, but my presentation is not going to be the song and dance. So, but I'll do the best I can. As I proceed during my remarks, I'm going to cover a little bit about where we are financially as a state, a little bit about the pension plan, because there's so many Zoomers this afternoon who are participating in our state pension system. I want to give them a little update. Secondly, just wanted to mention something about Rotary, a minute about where my frustrations are, where my fears lie, and then open it up for questions. And if we have time, 2 minutes at the end for happy bucks. So with that, let's get started. Hang on just a minute, please. All right, so as far as the state of the state is concerned, as you probably heard a few months ago, we applied for and received $4 billion worth of COVID CARE Act money. And as soon as that money came into the account, we, as you could expect, put it into interest-bearing investments. Very quickly thereafter, $471 million of that $4 billion was allocated to 3 counties and 1 city by an act of Congress. And the 3 counties and 1 city by act of Congress were populations of over 500,000 people. And so the counties that got part of the $471 million were Wake, Guilford, and Mecklenburg, and the 1 city was Charlotte. I'm often asked, because I'm sure you're already thinking, why didn't Raleigh get any of that money? And the answer is not political, it's mathematical. As big as Raleigh is, there aren't 500,000 people within the city limits of Raleigh. So once the money came down, it went to interest-bearing accounts, $471 million left for 3 counties and 1 city. And then the General Assembly, and unanimously, both chambers, all political parties, passed some COVID legislation that the governor signed that expended about $1.5 billion more. So where do we stand this afternoon, Gavin? We have about $2 billion still left in COVID CARE Act money. We have $2 billion in a budget surplus from the previous year. And as you've heard, the state is facing shortfalls of about $3.5 billion. On top of that, we have a $1 billion rainy day fund. And on top of that, we have nearly $3 billion in unemployment trust fund. I can tell you, as a person who used to be in charge of the unemployment division, that those folks have been hit with a tsunami and a hurricane all at one time because of the massive amount of claims that have been put into the unemployment system. But it should be worth some happy bucks to know that, unlike 7 years ago when that trust fund was $2.6 billion in debt, at least there's $3 billion in surplus, so that when those claims and those backlogs get cleared, at least the money's there to pay out the benefits, which is important. As far as my frustration is that and many of you know who are have been or are elected leaders on this Zoom. Anytime a string is attached to anything in Washington, that string stays attached when it gets to Raleigh, and as it leaves the General Assembly and gets dispersed out to the communities, DG knows this, that those strings remain attached. So my number one frustration is that the strings put on this is that this money had to be used for COVID-related activities. What in this world, starting with how Tim's having to reconfigure the school supply store, which we're supporters of here in Winston-Salem, Tim, with Carol Chandler. Everything in our lives is COVID-related. And the fact is that when people were not mobile, they weren't consuming. And when they weren't consuming, they're not generating the income, the gas, the sales, and the occupancy tax that goes to fund the things that East Chapel Hill Rotary Club cares about, which is public education, public safety, public works, and public roads. So I would love for them to technically correct the CARES Act bill that is already passed, for which we've already received the money for, so that the state and the local communities can actually use that money to backfill their important core services associated with the massive decline that we've seen in funding in many areas of our state. Where are my fears? My fears are with rural North Carolina. And this really goes to, I've enjoyed Bill's presentation also, and very interesting. All the things that Bill talked about, let me talk about rural North Carolina in the sense of COVID-19. What COVID has exposed to some folks is just how depopulated some of our communities have gotten over the last 20 years, which Bill sort of touched on. So let me give you a visual example. I was the drive-through commencement speaker about 6 weeks ago at the Columbia High School, which is the only high school in Terrell County, which is the county that you would drive through to get to the Outer Banks from East Chapel Hill. The graduating class was 38 people. The number of people in Terrell County today is about equal to the student faculty population at Myers Park High School in Charlotte. So the number of citizens in a county is about equal to a large population of a high school. Why should that matter to you? The reason it should matter is that the piece of information you don't have is that Terrell County, like many rural counties, has suffered a 25% decline in their sales tax revenue. So when you have a 25% decline in your sales tax revenue, and you have that few people, there's no economic development or activity or population or vibrant property tax base in order to make up that shortfall. So my fear is for all of rural North Carolina, especially rural North Carolina between Chapel Hill and the Atlantic Ocean. Briefly on the pension plan, since so many who are a part of the East Chapel Hill Rotary Club are connected to this pension plan at some point. So let me put this in context to what Nick mentioned in the opening remarks. The pension plan this week hit a high level that is never seen in the history. And it hit that level back in February, but since then we've actually paid out $1.5 billion worth of benefits. So for all the stress and anxiety that are in people's lives right now, especially those that teach, those that protect, and those that otherwise serve our local and our state citizens, that the pension plan is basically for the fiscal year that just ended June 30th was up 4%. And for the calendar year, as of last night, it's up about 1.5% for the calendar year. That's not the 7% that we need, but the fact is that those are fantastic results, and it sort of mirrors what a report that came out last fall. We asked for this pension plan to be stress tested. Now, the stress test would be the same thing that DG and I would go through at our age once in a while. I wanted this pension plan to be stress tested to see how it would hold up if the stock market went down, if employment went down, if interest rates went up. because at the end of the day, on behalf of those that teach, protect, and serve, at the end of the day at the Treasurer's Office, as the keepers of the public purse, we are in the check delivery business. Last Friday, we deposited nearly $530 million. That was 1 month's benefit for all the folks who were in the North Carolina retirement system. That went out to 314,000 individuals. So Pew came back, Pew Research, and said we were the top handfuls of pension plans in the United States in terms of our fundedness. But Moody's, which is for you equivalent to a credit score, the rating agency for me is like a credit score for you or a sanitation grade for a restaurant. Moody's came back and said we were the #1 pension plan in the United States in terms of our ability to continue funding it during an economic downturn. And so I'm very pleased to report these numbers, but I want to be very clear that even though I'm giving you this information, I'm standing on the shoulders of the conservative way that the investment management team has always managed this pension plan, and the conservative way that all the previous state treasurers for the last 50, 60, 70 years have always managed this pension plan. We don't have a crystal ball, and we don't gamble because, as I said earlier, at the end of the day, we're in the check delivery business. Very quickly, and I'll start talking a little bit faster, just a tribute to the Rotary Club. You know, every week when I go to Raleigh from Winston-Salem or come back to Winston-Salem, it never fails that I see a Rotary sticker on the back of a car or even a digital billboard. So I understand the importance of Rotary, and you know, a goosebump is one of the bodily functions you can't control. And it gives me goosebumps just to imagine where our communities and our state and our country could be right now if all elected leaders adopted the 4-way test and the motto of service above self. The second thing is that when I come home to Winston-Salem, I always notice a Paul Harris Award that's hanging in our den. It's hanging beside the picture of our son, who was tragically killed at the age of 7 over 20 years ago. And it was bestowed on him by his godparent, who was a member of the Gate City Rotary Club. So for all of you Paul Harris recipients out there, I understand the significance of that, and I applaud you. But the third thing, and this is maybe as close as I'll ever get to be on the bookmark show, book watch, excuse me. We have bookmarks in Winston-Salem, DG, so bear with me. On the show is to remind you of the movie Monuments Men. Monuments Men was about a group of middle-aged folks that the President of the United States had deputized, artists, historians, architects, to get between the Allied forces toward the end of World War II and the German forces who were retreating. So why would the president do that with artists, historians, and architects? The reason is that he received information that Hitler had ordered the destruction of the tens of thousands of manuscripts, sculptures, and pieces of art that had been captured over the last 3 years, ordered all of that to be destroyed before his time was ending. And he knew that if he could destroy the history, that people like him could possibly thrive because people would lose their bearing. And 3/4 of the way through the movie, if you remember, one of the Monuments Men loses his life. And George Clooney's trying to build up their spirits, and I'll paraphrase that he was basically saying this: there'll be a day when thousands of school kids and artists, art lovers, and tourists from around the world are going to visit the great museums of the world and witnessing what it is we're preserving. But they're never going to know who did it. And that's not why we're here. And that's not why the East Chapel Hill Rotary Club is there either. When I look at all the mission work you do, all the outreach work you do, and all the philanthropy you do, there are many instances, whether there's an insignia on a face mask or not, there's many instances where the things the East Chapel Rotary Club does that no one really knows who did it. But that's not why you're there either. You're there because of the 4-way test and the service above self. So as I go into questions, Gavin, and you can ask me any question you like on any subject, I just want to salute all the Monuments women and men who are part of the East Chapel Hill Rotary Club. And with that, I'll be glad to entertain any question that you might have.
Well, thank you so much for your time with us today. We're grateful for you being here. Let me open it up. I'll confess, my internet here has not been super stellar, and so I have not gotten chat questions, but let's open it up to questions. If you have a question, please just go ahead and ask.
Gavin, I have a question. I sent this through the chat function, but maybe it's not working, just so if anyone else has this problem. But Treasurer Folwell, thank you so much for being with us today. And I wanted to ask you, I hope this is not a personal question, but I read, and I know others have read, that you had COVID earlier this year, and wondered how you're doing, how you're feeling, and what that was like for you.
Tell me your first name.
I'm sorry, this is David Bedour.
Oh, hey, David, how are you?
I'm okay.
This is where I could get emotional. You learned very quickly, especially when I had COVID, and all the uncertainty around COVID-19 toward the end of March. David, there's a difference between being religious and being spiritual. For the longest time, David, I'm the only person anyone had ever heard of who had COVID-19. And then I was the only person people had ever heard of who had been intensely hospitalized for 6 days with COVID-19. And then I was the only person that folks had ever heard of my age with my A blood type who had actually walked out of a hospital with COVID-19. So it's been a very interesting times for me since the third week of March. The other thing I want to attempt to answer your question through, David, is to tell you that when you hear this word asymptomatic, and when you really want to know what that looks like, you're looking at it right now. And what I'm about to tell you is true yesterday, it's true today, and I hope it'll be true tomorrow. I've never had a fever. I've never had GI issues. I've never had a loss of taste, never had a loss of smell, never had shortness of breath, and never had a headache. But ultimately, I was tested for COVID-19 because somebody heard something in my voice and got tested. Back then, the tests were taking 3 days to get back. Test came back on a Wednesday. I had an appointment with my family doctor on Friday. When he took a picture, David, of my chest, it was as white as the shirt that I'm wearing right now. You could barely see the outline of the heart and the diaphragm, which are things you're supposed to see in a chest x-ray. My doctor said, you have none of these symptoms. Do you have an oxygen meter? And I've been racing motorcycles competitively for 45 years in the most intense kind of dirt bike motorcycle racing in the United States. And, you know, when you drive to Crawfordsville, Indiana, or Beckley, West Virginia, or Binghamton, New York to race a motorcycle or dirt bike, you better have something in the truck that you can test yourself to see if you're in good enough shape to drive back. So I've always carried a little finger oxygen meter with me, and my doctor said, if your ox levels fall below 90, you need to report to the emergency room immediately. And I don't know how the men are at the East Chapel Hill Rotary Club. I know the women are amazing about their willingness to go to the doctor or go to the hospital, but Folwell men don't have a good track record of going to the doctor, especially not driving themselves to the hospital. It's just not something that we like to do very much. But Sunday morning, my ox level fell to 85. My wife, Cynthia, I said, I need you to take me to the hospital. And that's probably where I'll get the most emotional, because the lingering effects of COVID-19 are starting to think about the emotional toll it took on people who love me and have been praying for me, who were completely uncertain as to what my outcome was going to be. All they were hearing was that he's very fragile. So this was Sunday that I went in to the hospital. I was in the emergency room for 29 minutes. Very soon thereafter, they unsolicited gave me the cocktail that you've heard so much about, hydrochloroquine and Z-Pak. Went straight to the intensive care unit. Monday, they came in and they turned my bed around. The reason is, and DG, don't laugh at this, but I'm considered to be an analytical person, and I was actually analyzing everything, and the nurses station could show through my vitals when I started analyzing stuff, because there was just a great deal of uncertainty as to why my body was rejecting oxygen. So they started me on oxygen as 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5.5, 6, 6.5. My body was still rejecting oxygen. My oxygen level would not go up. They turned my bed around so that I was looking out in the hall. So this went on all day Monday, and this medicine, I guess, puts you in a sleep that I've never experienced in my life. It's not nightmarish, it's not deja vu, it's just a deep sleep. And at about 2:15 in the morning, of course, all the instruments are behind me above my head. About 2:15 the next morning, Tuesday morning, I started noticing a lot of activity around my room. And I looked up, and I was on 8.5 units of oxygen, and my oxygen level was still below 90. And I knew that in terms of being a candidate to be ventilated, that they were getting ready to ventilate me. And I woke up from this deep sleep, and I had this Timothy Robbins, Morgan Freeman moment from the Shawshank Redemption, where Timothy Robbins says it's best to get on with living or get on with dying. And from that moment, I adopted this monastic thinking about my breathing, where I was just breathing in as if I were inhaling a whole bouquet of roses, and exhaling so slowly that I wanted to blow out 62 candles on my next birthday cake. And about 2 or 3 hours after that, they did not ventilate me. I'm not sure I'd be standing here right now if they had of, because of what was going on and just what people didn't know about this whole process. But gives me just an opportunity to tell you that I thank all the caregivers who helped me through that touch and go situation, and to tell you that when in the words of the old James Johnson song, you should have seen it in color. David, I've seen COVID-19 in color, and I appreciate more than most the focus on flattening the healthcare curve. But at the same time, as the state treasurer, I know for an absolute fact that we've got another curve out there that has to be flattened, and that is the economic curve. And trying to find that balance is really important.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. That's a pretty amazing testimonial, and we're certainly glad that that your experience ended the way that it did. I know that Brian Keeliff has a question. Brian, are you available?
Yes, I'm here. Dale, that's an inspirational story there. That's mind over your body there, so congratulations. Dale, we read about hurricane relief funds. We had $1 billion, and just a small amount of that has been dispensed. So perhaps you'd be able to explain why that is. And also, secondly, your attempts to get this current $4 billion that we've got more flexible so that you can use it. What are your chances of getting that more freely at your discretion? Thank you.
Well, thank you, Brian. It would be at the discretion of the General Assembly, Governor, and the Office of State Management budget. All we do is we keep the money earning interest while they're deciding what to do with it. So let's go back to hurricane relief. As you mentioned, the rainy day fund is about $1 billion. It was $2 billion, but we've had hell of a lot of rain over the last 2.5 years. So I didn't cover this in my frustration part, Brian, but the federal government owes the state of North Carolina tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars from the last 2 hurricanes and storms that we faced. So I'd like to get that money in also. So that's where we are as far as the rainy day fund. As far as the strings attached, we have $2 billion still left in the COVID CARE Act fund. And the reason why that most likely has not been spent or appropriated is that the General Assembly, I'm sure in concert with the governor and the Office of State Management budget, they want to see if they can get these strings detached, so that, because if you spend the money, it's gone. But if you can get these strings detached so that this money can be used to backfill for the important services of public education, public safety, public works, and public roads, then that would be highly important to kind of help us stabilize this economy, and also help us stabilize the counties and cities. You know, I didn't share in my frustrations. We appreciate Wake, Guilford, and Mecklenburg getting this money, but as you all know, we have 100 counties, not 3. We have 540 cities, not 1. To give you an example of how that shook out, Alamance, to your west, got $3 million. Guilford County got $93 million. Forsyth got 6. So those are 3 counties right connected, 3, 93, and 6. So my point is that we have got to not only take care to make sure that the state budget is balanced, but we also got to make sure that we're realizing that we have to have a state, no disrespect to anyone's situation, but we have to have a state where our legs and our arms are strong, not just the torso being Mecklenburg, the Triad, and the Triangle. My other thing, which I didn't get into, but I think it's appropriate given what I've heard about your club previously, we are in danger of creating an economic inequality, especially in rural North Carolina, not just among groups of people, but among regions of our state. There are 2 southern cities in North Carolina that you've all heard of that sound very similar, Charlotte and Charlotte. And I can tell you, even though they almost are spelled the same, and even though they're both southern cities, I can tell you that Charlotte and Charlotte are in far different boats today as they try to bend their curve. And we're just in a really tough situation where we have to have transparent, data-driven, consistent policies as we try to bring safety and the joy of achievement and open mobility back to the citizens.
Thank you. But Dale, what about all those people after Hurricane Matthew? They haven't got their money yet, and the money's there. What's the holdup?
Well, the money hasn't been, from my understanding, and Brian, I will. What nobody on this call needs right now is for elected officials to give an answer that sounds so certain, but it's not correct. So I think your question goes to the amount of money that we have applied for in North Carolina to be reimbursed back to us by the federal government, and it has not arrived yet. So between now and the close of business on Monday, I will give you an update about which hurricane, which storm, and how much money is still in the what I would consider the accounts receivable.
We don't need to put you to any more work, Dale. I think you have more than enough on your plate. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Jim Hefner has a question, I think.
Okay. Hey, Jim.
Hey, Dale, how are you? Thanks for your good work for us. I have 2 questions, one of which reveals my current events naivety. But I remember growing up always somehow feeling that we ought to be proud of the fact that North Carolina had a balanced budget statutory requirement. I don't know whether it was in our Constitution or in legislation. But the first question is, does that still prevail? And fundamentally related to that, what do you do? You talked about what kept you up at night if the markets were bad and you needed more money. What do you do if you run out of money? And then the second part of that is that I think you're an elected official, and so is Beth Wood, who is an elected official, and she works as the state auditor. Is that auditing business? How does that work? Is that an ongoing activity? Is it collegial and cooperative? Is it challenging and difficult? I think it'd be interesting to know how that operates. I think you are maybe in your first term, and I think that Mrs. Wood or Ms. Wood, I think, has been around a little bit longer. But maybe you can tell us how that works. I'm curious.
A great question. Number one, we still are responsible for balancing our budget, so that's still in its existence. I wouldn't trade North Carolina's position with any other state in terms of our financial stability and being able to pull out of this crisis. We're one of 13 states with a AAA bond rating. We got one of the best funded pension plans. And why should you care about this pension plan if you're not on it? The reason is the 3 biggest expenses of the city of Chapel Hill are the pension expense, the healthcare and pharmaceutical expense, and interest and principal on the local debt. So this is not just a state issue, it's also a local issue. So to go back to why that matters, the reason that matters is that our pension plan, for example, is nearly 88% funded. I talked to the treasurer of South Carolina this morning. Theirs is 55% funded. The Alabama retirement system is 64% funded. One of the Kentucky teacher retirement systems is 33% funded.
Hey, Dale, excuse me, we're about to run out of time. We've got 2 minutes. And basically, I'm just curious, what do you do if you run out of money?
Well, I don't think that's going to happen. But all I can tell you is that we just have to be more evangelical about watching the pennies and the paper clips, and like all the communities and everybody's done. Do I have another 60 seconds for Happy Bucks?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. We manage $200 billion. That's 8 times the size of the state budget. So when we do well, everybody does well. The pension plan by itself is the 26th largest pool of public money. I have a great relationship with Auditor Wood. She looks down on me. And if you've ever seen her and I side by side, you understand what I mean figuratively. So we have a great working relationship. But part of the things we do at the Treasurer's Office is something called nccash.com. Now, I used to stutter, so I'm advised not to use the word escheats too often in a sentence. But nccash.com is $750 million of things that belong to people that have lived in North Carolina. And the reason I'm mentioning this to your Rotary Club is that I've never, ever spoken to a Rotary Club where somebody in the audience didn't have something at nccash.com. We gave $600,000 last year to a lady who was the beneficiary of a life insurance policy, but no one ever told her. So what I would suggest is this: when you go to nccash.com, there's no charge to look up your name, your maiden name, your kids' names, your parents' names, and there's no charge to get what is owed you. More importantly, nccash.com, as I look at all the outreach that East Chapel Hill Rotary Club does, I would just suggest that before you give money to any organization, you make sure they don't have money at nccash.com. We gave $22,000 last year to the Eastern Food Bank of North Carolina. That was 66,000 meals. We just gave money to the Lee County 4-H Club, the hospice of Davidson County. So before you do your outreach, make sure they don't have money at nccash.com that could actually help your outreach. But more importantly, it looks like everybody's in great shape today, and this is very serious. We have things, in case you're missing any one of these 4 things, you may also find those at nccash.com. Baby teeth, silver teeth, gold teeth, and false teeth. And the reason I say that, and DG knows that anytime you don't pay the rent on a lockbox in North Carolina, it gets drilled out and the contents come to nccash.com. But to be far more serious for a moment, we were able to return some World War II medals to a family who'd been looking for them for 14 years. And those World War II medals were in an abandoned lockbox that ended up at nccash.com. So as I close, I'd love to come back sometime in person. I see a lot of folks on your Zoom call that I'm familiar with, and I salute all the Monuments women and men who are part of the East Chapel Hill Rotary Club.
Well, Treasurer Folwell, thank you so much for sharing your time with us today. We're grateful for your leadership and what you're doing to keep us in good financial stead as a state, and we're very grateful. That was an inspirational and an educational presentation, and we're grateful. We wish everybody a happy weekend. Be safe, and we will look forward to tuning in again next Friday at our regular time. Be well. Bye-bye, folks.